Calling the Marin Water meeting for Tuesday, July 21st. First on the agenda is I wanted to announce that we will close the meeting today at Cynthia Kohler's request in honor of Huey Johnson. All right. And I think we're up for the adoption of the agenda, but I want to make one suggested change. Go ahead, Ben.
But before we go to the agenda, I thought it'd be useful if Jeannie could share with members of the public how we're anticipating, what our plan is in regards to public comments tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, President Gibson. We just want to take the time to remind the public that they can participate in our board meetings by submitting comments via email to boardcomment@marinwater.org or by joining the meeting online using the Zoom link or phone number provided on the agenda and on our website. Emailed comments on information and discussion items will be sent to all board members and posted on our website, and the public will have additional opportunities to comment on those items at future meetings prior to board taking action. Emailed comments on approval items will be read aloud at the meeting prior to the board taking action on that item and will also be posted on the website. For those members of the public who are joining using Zoom, you can also participate during the comment period by clicking the raise hand button on your screen, or if you're calling in by pressing *9, and we'll call on you during the comment period. Due to the large number of comments for tonight's meeting, and to ensure that we hear from as many participants as possible, each comment will be limited to 1 minute. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, before we adopt the agenda, obviously the major item that we're addressing tonight's meeting is the e-bike discussion. No decision will be made, but it will be a hearty discussion, I'm sure. So I would propose that we get the regular part of the meeting out of the way first, which would entail moving item number 9, future agenda items, up one, and switch 8 or 9 on our agenda.
Jack, were you thinking also about moving public expression?
Yes, that's a good one. Let's put a public expression at the very end of the meeting. And with those two proposals, if there's agreement, I'd like to get a motion to adopt the agenda.
I'd move with the amendments proposed.
A second?
I seconded.
Okay, all in favor?
We need a roll call.
Yeah.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Director Quintero,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
President Gibson.
Okay, we've moved. Any directors' announcements?
I have a quick announcement, Jack, if that's okay, just about
Sure.
the point that Ben made about the adjournment. We're going to be taking a moment tonight when we adjourn to honor the memory of Huey Johnson, who passed away this week at the age of 87. It is no exaggeration to say that Huey was a giant in the world of environmental protection. His resume is well known to many, especially here in Marin County, where he and his family made their home. President of the Nature Conservancy, founder of the Trust for Public Land, and Natural Resource Secretary in the first Brown administration. Huey was the recipient of numerous accolades and awards for his considerable accomplishments. For the hikers among us, Huey's legacy is ever present in the gifts of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, one of the nation's great stories of how an extraordinary landscape was saved for generations to roam and enjoy by a determined, feisty, and very strategic set of activists. But it was around water that I had the opportunity to connect with Huey. He saw clearly the challenges in the way that we capture and manage water and brought his considerable intellect and vision to bear on problems he saw as fundamental. There was no one funnier or more lacerating on the subject of California's curious and often counterintuitive approach to water rights. For me, and I believe many other environmentalists that he inspired, it was a privilege and an honor to have known him and a delight to be around him. Not every great man is a wonderful person, but Huey Johnson was that and more. We are the lesser for his passing, and we send our deepest sympathies to the Johnson family. He will be missed.
Yeah, here, here. Any other directors' comments? Okay, hearing none. Any general managers' announcements?
I do have a brief announcement. President Gibson, I wanted to let the board know that the district was notified of a grant to support our water efficiency, our water conservation program. This is part of the Bay Area Water Conservation Group that in total was awarded $4.1 million in Prop 1 grant funding, and our portion is $222,000. Staff will be coming to a subsequent meeting with details on the activities and matching and timing associated with this. This is a continuation of good staff work to pursue these grants and a fair measure of success. So I wanted to share that with the board.
Yes, and congratulations.
Congratulations.
Okay, that takes us to our consent calendar. Can I get a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, any comments? No, all in favor?
No, we need a roll call, Jack.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Director Quintero,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
President Gibson.
Aye. Okay. We are on number 5, monthly water supply report. I think that's Paul.
Yes, good evening. Paul Sellier, Operations Director. If you just bear with me for a moment, I will share my screen. And can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. So this evening, we're going to take a look at our production and supply through June, and then, take a quick snapshot of the system as it is this week, actually yesterday. And then we'll take a look at our projections for storage going forward. Our first slide is just in June, this is where we ended up with a total of 63,300 or so acre feet in the reservoirs, about 80% of total capacity, and 95% of normal storage for this state. So pretty decent position there. Looking at our monthly water production in a tabular format, this is for the fiscal year from July through June, the total production, and you can see we're about 26,800 acre feet, which is relatively high compared to the previous years. And just remember, this isn't demand, this is production. Demand is about 10% less than this overall. But nonetheless, this trend of increased water production in this case continues, and we'll see that in other slides. Our imported water, you'll note we're just over our minimum allotment of 5,300. We were able to get 5,626 acre feet this year, and we're continuing with that strategy. Looking at it in a different format, our monthly production, comparing the last 5 years together, you'll see here in June, the sort of turquoise bar, again, it's repeating the pattern that we've seen all year with higher numbers for production throughout the year. Though you'll notice that June, the difference is somewhat smaller. And you might explain that by thinking about remembering how dry it was in February and March. And so, the additional water use in those months may have skewed this increase. So as we get into July, maybe we'll get a more normalized picture of what that increase in production looks like. Again, another way to look at it is in this running 12-month chart. And you'll notice from about, 2002, a peak there, you've got an overall downward trend. But sort of in this local zone here at the end since 2016, we are seeing, again, that trend increasing in demand. And it will be interesting as we go forward to see when this peak turns. And we're all, of course, hoping for sooner rather than later. Moving to our cumulative precipitation, we're at about 67% of average. And that, of course, now that we're in the sort of dry summer period, that's really not going to change as we move through summer and into fall. Our reservoir storage then, represented in this case by this orange line, comparing to our average for storage, we're again about 95%. And you can see that really hasn't changed that much. And I would expect these two lines to track pretty closely as we go through the summer. The water that we did supply in June was of good quality, of course. And one indicator of that is the number of complaints that we received for taste and odors of that water. And we received just 2 in June, which is a pretty good achievement. So that was our June. This is a look at our reservoir storage as of yesterday. So into, more than halfway through July, we've got 61,000 acre feet. We're still at about 95% of normal for the date. And our partners to the north, Lake Sonoma has 199,543 acre feet, about 90% or so, 91% of normal for the date. So we turn now to sort of projecting out through next April. And I'll just walk through this graph quickly. The black line is our actual reservoir storage to date. And as it transitions to the brown line, this represents where we're going to go in terms of storage through summer. And about, toward the end of October, November, when sort of a traditional rainy period begins for us, fingers crossed, the graph splits out into these projections. And again, these are sort of based on rainfall projections, with the orange line being normal precipitation. So this is the storage curve in the reservoirs with normal rainfall, and the purple line representing 150% of normal, and the turquoise blue line just 50% of normal. So in all cases at this point, our projections indicate we will not hit any of our rationing triggers by next April, where the sort of 50% rainfall pattern to occur. Of course, these storage curves are based on our planned purchase of water, and our next slide talks a little bit about that. And as you recall, we're front-loading our purchases of water from Sonoma. And just step back very quickly. On this chart, the gray bars represent what would sort of be a normal year for us in terms of purchases, where we would purchase 5,300 acre feet from Sonoma. What we're planning to do is sort of try to buy as much water as we can through summer and into the rainy period, where in somewhere around halfway through January, we're going to actually hit our 5,300 mark. And at that point, of course, we'll be into our rainy period, hopefully, and we'll know sort of what kind of winter we're expecting. And at that point, if it continues to be dry, we can continue to purchase water at this accelerated rate. On the other hand, if it turns out that it's a nice wet winter that we're all hoping for, we can tone down these purchases to minimums through the rest of the year. So it's hopefully the best of both worlds for us that we will be able to optimize those purchases in that manner. At the last meeting, there was a request to show the effect of our water purchases on our storage curves, right? How important are these purchases in terms of preserving water in our reservoirs, essentially? And again, this is the same chart that we walked through before, with the black line representing our actual reservoir storage to date, transitioning through summer here into the beginning of the rainy period in November. And the same, 150% normal and 50% of normal rain storage curves.
Is normal there synonymous with the average over time? Is that what we mean?
That's correct. So normal would be our 52 inches of rain, which is our average rainfall over time. So, so that's what this orange line would represent. And of course, the 150% and the 50% being turquoise. Now the added lines here are gray. And if you recall, these colored lines are based on our current FY21 front-loaded purchases of water. So they represent, if we were to continue purchasing water through January and into next June, essentially, right? I'm purchasing almost 10,000 acre-feet of water from Sonoma. That's what these colored lines represent. Were we to back off that and just, you know, try to hit our minimum 5,300, the storage in the reservoirs would be represented by these gray lines. So you can see in the case of the normal rainfall, this difference as we got out to June would be about 5,300 acre-feet in the storage in the reservoirs. So it is a significant supply for us, and one that we want to be in a position to take advantage of. And I think our current strategy allows us to do that. In summary, then, we're going to continue with our front-loaded purchases of water in case the winter turns out to be dry. As we go through summer, we're going to continue demand management through water use efficiency initiatives. And of course, we're going to continue to monitor demand and storage to make sure that those two factors in our projections still hold true. And our weather outlook, well, we're in our typical summer pattern, so not much in the way of change there. And that's all I have tonight for our monthly water supply report.
All right, any questions from the board?
I have a couple comments.
I have a couple questions, Jack.
Sure.
Going back to the first slide, Paul, where you had production and imports.
Yep.
Is the imported water included in production, or is it in addition to production?
It's included. It's the total potable.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then the other thing I wanted to bring up is a couple of the small water districts, I think Inverness and maybe Bolinas are in rationing mode, or soon will be, which also raises an issue about some of the agricultural uses out there in West Marin. And I'm just wondering whether any of them have contacted us for assistance, or if we have any contingency plans to help them with their supply.
So I believe North Marin Water District provides water to a water district out there. And we have an agreement with North Marin. Should they require it, we might be able to release a couple hundred acre-feet from our reservoir to help them get through this period. But we have not yet been contacted by North Marin, though I would say we probably expect that contact sometime in August, I would say. Okay. And at that time, of course, we'll bring that to your attention.
Okay.
I have a
And
couple
I know,
comments.
I think it was 2015, we were also supplying some trucked water for some of the ranches out in West Marin. So,
right.
And that would just be on an ad hoc basis.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. No, we've had no request for that.
Okay. Thanks, Paul.
Sure.
I have a couple comments. Can you hear me?
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. A couple things. You know, what we're looking at here is sort of like holding a large glass and saying, I have water, but there's no water in the tank. If you take a look at the current drought maps, the area that we're in is in a severe drought right now. And I think, you know, thank you very much, Paul, for putting the curves up that show the difference between us using the purchased water or not. But I do think it might, I'm going to make a request here. If there are drought maps that are current, we should actually post that as a part of the monthly water production report, because I think the customers need to understand the conditions that we are actually in. And as Larry Bragman pointed out, you know, Marin or rather Inverness and Bolinas they're in serious trouble. I mean, they're having to ration water. And so you know, and it makes me think about how do we work with customers And I'll express this frustration to all water agencies, not just us, but I find it frustrating that we talk about the water year in the coming summer as if it's predictable. It's not. And I think that we need to be thinking about water supply in multiple years, more than 1 year at a time. I think if this, I mean, and one way that I would look at this is if, what happens if we look at this and say, okay, this is going to be our water supply for a couple of years. And it's just, I mean, the reality of the climate change that we are experiencing is that there is no predictable near future in terms of what our precipitation will be. There is the new normal is it's totally unpredictable. And I think it would be prudent to talk to the public about that so that everybody starts to understand that there's a real shift here, even though it looks like we're fine at the moment. But as Director Bragman pointed out, our neighbors are experiencing the drought while we're not. Thanks. It was very good though, Paul. So this isn't a criticism. It's the complexity of what we're looking at, I think. So thanks.
Sure.
Any other directors' comments or questions? Okay, hearing none, do we have any public comments?
So President Gibson, we do have a hand raised by Robert Middlestat, and we're going to go ahead and Bert Barsh. We're going to go ahead and let them speak just to make sure whether or not their public comment is related to this item. Robert Middlestat?
Mine is not.
Thank you. So we're gonna go ahead and take your comment for when it's time for the item.
Okay.
Thank you. And so let's go ahead and go to Bert Barsh. Mr. Barsh, is your comment related to this item?
Yes, I have a comment and I also have a question. And my question just is, was there an open time? Did I miss open time comments, or are you going to have one? That's my question.
We put the open time to the very end of the meeting.
Okay. So number 2 is I just wanted to thank Larry Bragman because that was exactly what I wanted to find out about. And I also appreciate the comments saying that we need to have a long-term plan because weather is not something we can count on clearly. And the amount of rainfall we cannot count on clearly. And with Sacramento shutting down so much of its agriculture and talking about shipping food down to, shipping the water to LA, I think we're clearly in trouble in terms of where we are going to be getting our food. And we're going to need to become far more self-sufficient. And if our funds continue to be cut off via the federal government, which is what looks like they plan on doing in so many ways, and with the COVID crisis and with our economy clearly tanking in almost any way that you want to look at it, I mean, we are in serious trouble. The idea of spending any money on
so sorry.
I'll wrap up. The idea of spending money on anything right now is clearly ridiculous, and we need to tighten our belts like we've never done before, and it's going to take some very creative thinking. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, any other, go ahead, Charisse.
We have no additional public comment, but just a little reminder to the public that all emailed comments received on non-action items will be posted online and provided to the board. Thank you, President Gibson.
All right, thank you. We're on number 6 here now to fill a vacancy for the treatment plant operator.
Yes, good evening. Paul Cilli, Operations Director again. And yes, this is a request to hire a treatment plant trainee. We have a position vacancy that arose because one of our existing operators accepted a position in our engineering department. And of course, while we're sorry to see him leave operations, I think his experience in operating our treatment plants will serve him and us well in his new position. Of course, over the years, we've enjoyed quite a bit of success training our operators. In fact, just about all, including our current superintendent of water treatment, has gone through our trainee program. And tonight, we're requesting the board authorize the general manager to recruit and hire one treatment plant trainee position in the operations division. If there are any questions about that position, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay. Any board questions?
Just one. And I know this may have been short notice, but at our last meeting, I requested that we post the position descriptions with the announcements. Is this one where that would be appropriate?
I did talk this over, and we thought that this was such a fairly routine position. Of course, treatment plant operators operate our treatment plants. That we can certainly provide you the job description, but this is a very routine and sort of traditional position.
So the answer is no. I'm not on this one.
Not on this one.
Hmm.
Right.
Okay. Any other board questions, comments?
I actually think from a recruitment standpoint, it may be a good idea to do that in the future, no matter how routine the position may be. It just gives a little bit more notice to the public that there may be an opportunity in the district.
Mhm.
Could I just chime in? And
Yeah.
I agree with you, Armando. It's going to give us a little wider circulation,
Yeah.
which may be beneficial.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's all.
We will do that in the future. This was my oversight.
No, I'm not complaining. I was just,
I just want to reflect that we did hear this request last time, and we'll be doing this in the future.
okay.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I think we're on item, any public comment on this?
There was no public comment received.
Okay, thank you. We need a roll call vote. Oh, I guess we need a motion to approve it.
I'll make the motion.
All right,
Second.
second? Okay, good, thank you. I guess we're ready for a roll call vote. Mhm.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Kohler,
Okay.
Director Quintero,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
President Gibson.
Aye.
We need to do 9, Jack.
No, we're on 7, actually.
When did we do 9? I know you moved it, but I don't think we ever did it.
We switched 8 and 9, so after we do 7, we'll do 9 and then 8.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to remind you, don't forget 9.
No,
That's
no, no, okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, this is item number 7 we're on is a request from the grand jury regarding the grand jury report.
Board members, President Gibson, this item is in regards to this past April, the Marin County Grand Jury released a report entitled Follow-Up Report on Web Transparency of Agency Compensation Practices. And I did want to share throughout that report, which is attached to the staff report, the district MMWD was identified as a model, as a great example for all the agencies throughout the county in our longstanding practices of how we report transparently board compensation. Which is typically the case in these grand jury reports, there are certain findings and recommendations they asked agencies to respond to. Attached is a proposed response where we would send it out shortly to the grand jury, responding to 1 finding and 2 recommendations. The first finding was asked of all agencies in regards to the practices of many agencies are not as transparent as a grand jury thought would be ideal. Specifically noting, as we do in our response, we remind the jury that for this item, we were noted as an example in the grand jury report. So we certainly agree with this finding. We had also a recommendation the grand jury asked us to respond to incorporate a link on our webpage that goes directly to the county's elected officials page, and noting precisely where they wanted that link to go. And we did that immediately following receipt of the grand jury report. And lastly, recommendation 6 that I believe was asked of all agencies, no later than a date certain to adopt a practice, to compile and publish in some detail in regards to transparency of compensation. Our response, we noted it had been implemented, and in fact, we had a longstanding practice, as was acknowledged within the grand jury report, of doing this. So I'm interested at this time if you have any comments on this response now or shortly. You could send them to me because we do need to get this response off to the grand jury.
Good, good.
A quick comment then. I just think you're to be congratulated in the team. Transparency has always been a high priority and a value for the board and the district, but I think this is important and impressive, testament to the success that we've had. So congratulations to you for that.
Absolutely. Okay, any other board comment? Do we have any public comment on this item?
Not have any public comment on this item.
Okay, it's not an approval item, so we can move on to, now we'll cover number 9, the future agenda scheduled.
Oh, yes. So this reflects our upcoming board meeting and committee meeting schedule. As I had talked about with President Gibson, we are canceling this coming Thursday's Finance Committee, and the reason for that deals with the need to year-end reconcile the books and bring an accurate June report that would reflect the fiscal year, full, accurate, auditable reconciliation, and that'll be forthcoming. Aside from that, we're on schedule for all, as calendared, all upcoming board and committee meetings. And just a light reminder for staff is working on the board annual retreat in September.
Right. Now, the last I saw, the annual retreat in September was a tentative date. Has that been firmed up as much as it can be firmed up today?
Yes, it has.
Okay, thank you. Any board comments or questions on future agenda items? Any public comment on future agenda items?
President Gibson, we do have one hand raised.
Okay.
So I'll go back to Bert Barsh.
Oh, yes.
And just a reminder to the members of the public, public comment is restricted to 1 minute, excuse me. And Bert Barsh, is this comment related to item number 9?
I'm sorry, it was actually related to the last item, but I couldn't find the Zoom button to comment. So I'll lower my hand.
Okay, all right, we'll be back to you.
There's no additional public comments.
Okay, now are we doing open time now or after number item 8?
I believe after item 8 is.
Okay, good. Then that takes us to the last item on our agenda other than open time. And that's discussion on an update on e-bikes.
I'd like to briefly kick this item off, and then I'll hand it over to Sean Horn, our watershed manager. This is an item, part of our ongoing working through with the public and the board, this rather complex and challenging issue. There is no staff recommendation. There is no request, and there will not be any board action tonight on this item. I expect we're some months away before we bring this item to the board for a decision with a staff recommendation. we, as you will see as part of Sean's presentation, we are proposing to take another fairly intensive effort to engage key stakeholder groups on this item. And we anticipate doing that in advance of the next board update. So the board and the public can expect a fair number of these updates coming prior to any recommendation, and very likely it will be, as it has been, a bit of an evolving process going forward.
Okay.
And there was, I did want to just touch, I think some wording in the staff report suggested kind of a quick jump, or due to the nature of the Zoom or the summer, rushing this item. As you'll see in the background in Sean's presentation, that really is far from our intent. We've had a workshop quite a while ago, ongoing discussions with members of the public, a intensive community advisory committee, and from staff's view, the process and discussion is continuing, and all the information and all the comments to date are posted on our website, and we anticipate continued engagement and hearing from the public for some months to come. With that, Sean?
All right, good evening, board members. Sean Horn, Watershed Resource Manager. I'm gonna share my screen with you. Just give me 1 second. So tonight's update is on e-bikes, and we have put a presentation together for all of you that summarizes the staff report, as well as the attachment to the staff report, which is the e-bike assessment. So we're briefly going to go over the district's regulations and the state laws relating to e-bikes. We'll do an overview of the process to date, and then we'll introduce a proposed 3-tier approach to addressing e-bike access on the watershed. We've broken this down to watershed user support framework, as well as the specific options for e-bike access. And then also are presenting a concept of a watershed sustainable use plan, which you can think as a much longer term planning effort to look at all watershed users as a whole. And then we also have a plan for public outreach to present this 3-tiered approach to different stakeholder groups. And then we'll present the next steps for tonight. So currently the Marin Municipal Water District regulates e-bikes under our motor vehicle code. As the code is currently written, motorized bicycles are prohibited on the district's lands. Currently, we have regulation signs that clearly denote this and show that e-bikes are not allowed on the watershed. As of October of 2019, Assembly Bill 1096 was signed, which was a state law that identified e-bike class 1 and 2 as bicycles. However, in that law, it also noted that public agencies may adopt rules or regulations to restrict or specifically establish specific conditions for e-bike access. As a local public agency, MMWD can decide how to regulate e-bikes that's in line with the district's watershed management objectives. To date, we've gone through a fairly exhaustive process, as Ben was mentioning, and we intend to continue this as we evolve this concept and approach and move it forward. In December of 2018, we had an e-bike public workshop and listening session where we heard from different community groups about their position on e-bike access in the watershed. From there, we heard a number of themes that came out of that workshop. And May 14, 2019, the board of directors approved the formation of a community advisory committee, which identified 10 individuals to participate over the period of 8 months to evaluate the different themes that came out of the workshop. From September through April, we held 7 meetings to evaluate those topics and brought in topical experts where appropriate to help us evaluate different groups had about e-bike access in the watershed. May 12th, 2020, we presented an e-bike summary report that presented the themes that came out of the discussion from the Community Advisory Committee and really identified a number of options and approaches that this district could take in e-bike access on the watershed. Since that time, staff has been refining some of the options that were discussed and taken some of the discussion points that were heard from the public and the board and developed this 3-tiered approach that's presented in the e-bike assessment tonight. So the 3-tiered approach has 3 elements that you can think about as near-term being watershed user support framework. These were topics that came out of our discussion with the community while we were looking at the e-bike access question, and elements that didn't specifically address access of e-bikes on the watershed. The second tier specifically focuses on the options for e-bike access. And then the third tier really looks long-term at how we might want to think about watershed use generally and bring some important points that were raised during the conversation forward. And we'll be presenting this at future board meetings to have more discussion on how this approach might look for the district. With that, I'm going to go into this first tier of this approach, which is the education and outreach program. And we've talked about this in relation to increased use relating to COVID, but also it relates to our e-bike discussion, which is ending our watershed ambassador program to include a watershed greeter and trail ambassador program. And also advancing some partnerships within the community with cycling groups, high school mountain bike teams, and environmental groups. As part of this outreach effort, we think there would be benefit to start promoting the use of bells and speedometers on the watershed. So one of the concepts is to actually purchase a number of these and start providing them at our outreach events to the community that's using our watershed to promote the use of them. We know that other groups are doing this and we think that's a good thing and that the district could help bolster that effort in general. We also acknowledge and have learned that partnerships are critical to this effort, and the Slow and Say Hello campaign has been essential to building trust and collaboration among different user groups. And so the district sees a need to expand that relationship and some of the events on the watershed in the immediate near term, and then longer term, look at kind of some strategic options for how we can further enhance that program and support it. So in regards to our education and outreach, the next steps are really developing the framework that's specific to this watershed greeter program. We'll roll that out with staff initially, and we actually have our first event planned for this Friday, August 31st, so next Friday. And we'll be partnering with the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy, OneTAM, as well as they bring back their outreach staff. And then in the future, we see this expanding to volunteer activities and events. So partnering with some of those cycling groups to actually have volunteers participate once we have the model down. And then purchasing bells and speedometers, that's something that we can do in the near term to help kind of bolster our outreach efforts and promote the use of those on the watershed. And then as I mentioned, continuing our partnership with the Slow and Say Hello campaign and pursuing deeper discussions about long-term strategies for the watershed and potential increased funding support to not only increase the number of watershed events annually, but also other kind of outreach opportunities that might come that would be beneficial to all of our users. So in addition, under our first tier, we also acknowledge that watershed signage can be improved. And specifically, we have a gap in our messaging relating to trail etiquette. So we want to expand our watershed signage on our messaging around trail etiquette. And we want to do this to foster tolerance, understanding, and respect amongst user groups. We appreciate and understand that signs alone won't solve this problem or some of the longstanding issues between users, but we think that it can really help in just informing people about how we can all be respectful while we're using the watershed. So we also think that expanding some of our slow zones would be really important and helpful, and just generally improving how users experience the watershed. And we've mapped out some of the slow zones that are already on the watershed on the map, which is in yellow, our existing slow zones, and in some areas where we want to expand these, which are in orange. And so segments of these orange lines would become yellow. We've heard from the community that with our slow zones, we should also be signing where they begin and end. And so that would be part of this signage process. So the next steps in regards to watershed signage is to develop that trail etiquette messaging, which we're currently working on with our communications department. As we go out and do the public outreach approach, we'll be reviewing that messaging with stakeholders and then looking at designing and printing those signs and installing them on the watershed in select locations. And you can think of this messaging being at our major kiosks, and that'll focus on kind of the regulations and the trail etiquette generally, and then some targeted signs throughout the watershed that kind of look like these yield, share the trail, respect other users signage, and then the slow zone signs as well.
Mm-hmm.
So in addition to signage, we acknowledge that enhanced enforcement is an important element that can help us kind of improve watershed use generally. And as part of that enhanced enforcement, we want to consider increasing closures and restoration of non-system trails on the watershed. This is something we do through our Project Restore program, so we'd be looking at expanding that.
Sean, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but you're cutting, you're a little choppy.
Okay.
Any way you can maybe get a little bit closer to the mic?
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
And if I have to, I can switch computers real quick. We could also evaluate new ordinances for speeding and slow zones. We currently do not have an ordinance for speeding in a slow zone. So that's something that we could expand as we expand slow zones, actually developing an ordinance that would allow rangers to enforce that. We could also increase speed monitoring in our high use downhill areas, as well as in our new slow zones. And then consider increasing fines for e-bikes and bikes generally on trails. So the bottom table identifies the fine structure that we currently have. Our base fine for first offense is $35. Most of the fees actually come from the court fees. So looking at expanding and increasing some of those to discourage use of trails by bikes, any bikes. We could also consider increasing fines for bikes and users generally in closed areas. So if we close an area off for a Project Restore, looking at actually increasing a fine for people that are going into those areas, because that is one of our major constraints in keeping those areas closed, is folks continuing to use an area that we've done and invested resources in restoring. The next steps in regards to enforcement is to develop some revisions to our current regulations and our fines, review those options with the board, and also consider discussions regarding staff capacity in general for the watershed. We'd also propose then we'd take the next step of updating watershed regulations and promoting those regulations generally among the community. So the three elements being outreach, signage, and enforcement kind of make up our first tier, which is our watershed use support framework. All of these elements were discussed generally during our e-bike CAC and during other public processes, and really expand beyond just the e-bike question itself. So we wanted to separate those out and put those in our first tier for this approach. The second approach really dives into this question and about e-bike access and the different options that we have. So based on the discussions that we've been having and the development of the different options, we have a first option, which would be conditional allowance of e-bikes, which would be essentially establishing conditions around access. We could think about these in a number of ways, but considering allowing e-bikes on all fire roads while establishing 1 or 2 days a week where no bikes were allowed on the watershed, or establishing alternating days of the week where e-bikes are allowed. We could also consider allowing access to a limited number of fire roads. And there's a number of models throughout the state of organizations and agencies restricting access in some way. And so we could continue to develop different considerations and options for having conditions to access for e-bikes. This would also include revising our relevant codes to strictly prohibit the use of e-bike rentals on the watershed, as well as restricting e-bike access on red flag days. So some of the considerations to take in for this approach is that it will take users some time to learn new regulations if we make changes to bikes generally, as well as e-bikes. Closing the watershed 1 or 2 days a week to all bikes may cause concern among some community groups, and separating the users may get to the root of the problem. And so for each of these different approaches and options, we've developed pros and cons lists. These aren't comprehensive, but they get to the essence of each of the pros and cons of the different approaches that we wanted to present to the board. So the conditional allowance would really facilitate inclusive access and encourages diverse users on the watershed. It protects other users through establishing some controls. It also is adaptable over time and could evolve as we see necessary and have adjustments that could be made to better support our users. It could be designed to separate some user groups to ensure access and safe access for other user groups. Some of the cons that we brought forward on this one is it will create more trail restrictions that may be confusing to some user groups. It may not align with other jurisdictions, and that's broadly true with all of these options. Broad agreement on an acceptable condition will be challenging, and potential for increased traffic on fire roads as we allow e-bikes would be something to be considered and thought through. It could be difficult to enforce some of these conditions as well. So these are just kind of considerations generally for the conditional allowance approach. The next approach that we discussed is no e-bike access. This would essentially align with our current regulations, and it would ban e-bikes from the watershed and reaffirm the passive recreation for the protection of water quality and natural resources. Some of the considerations for this is It does not support inclusive access. It may not align with our neighboring land management agencies' approaches. It will be difficult for some users who may unintentionally have violations to our regulations as they cross between neighboring lands. And it really does not facilitate access for diverse users, but would align with our current regulations. So the pros of this is it really does maintain the commitment to non-motorized use on the watershed. It establishes strict controls on user types. The focus is on access for existing user groups, and it would restrict overall use of the watershed to protect resources. However, as mentioned, it does not facilitate inclusive access. This would potentially be difficult to enforce, and restricting access to a growing user group in the interest of existing user groups is a difficult question to think through. And it's not an adaptive solution and doesn't acknowledge the changing needs of our users within the community. So the third option that we have is an open access approach. This would be essentially treating e-bikes as regular bicycles under the district bicycle code. The district would update the bicycle code to allow for class 1 and class 2 e-bikes, and it would restrict e-bike access on red flag days. An e-bike open access approach would support diverse users, but it could potentially significantly increase future use. And I think that's something we need to continue to bring up and think about in terms of the e-bike access. As we open access, it would be hard to go back and restrict future access if we did see a large increase in users. So that's something to be considering. The pros is this really does support inclusive access. It encourages outdoor activities for diverse user groups. It aligns with the state guidelines regarding bicycles, and it recognizes that it's the rider's behavior and not the type of bike that results in code violations often. The cons is this could increase watershed use and could impact other users as we see more e-bikers on the watershed. It could have unanticipated consequences associated with future usage. It could create some community concerns within the regard to impacts to natural resources. And it may create some safety issues on the watershed as more users are using our trail and road network. So the fourth option that we've presented and we've outlined here again in more detail is the option for a registration program. This would essentially establish a fee for service model for e-bikes. The district code would be revised to allow for citations to be issued for non-registered e-bikes. The district could choose to administer this program ourselves or partner with bicycle shops to administer the program. And the district could restrict e-bike rentals and access on red flag days. We've done a kind of skeleton SketchUp of the costs that might be associated with this registration program. And these costs were developed thinking what would be necessary to create a sustainable program into the future to ensure that the registration process was effective and meaningful. Without some of these elements, it would be difficult to actually administer this successfully and in a long-term approach. So some considerations regarding the fee, and you can see this in the e-bike access assessment, is it will be difficult to come up with a fee structure that generates enough revenue to cover the costs of a program. So this could be a very costly effort, and it may not be as successful as other approaches. It will be difficult to enforce, and it will take staff time. And that staff time will mean that rangers will be responding. It will take rangers time away from responding to other issues at times. So some of the pros of this is it really does support inclusive access while establishing a fee for service model. It allows the district to control some of this use and evaluate capacity as we administer the registrations. It could establish a partnership with bicycle shops generally to help with that registration process, but it does create accountability for users. So that's something that would be beneficial of the program. It's going to be difficult to enforce the registration broadly. It will require kind of staff support in a number of ways, administrative and enforcement. Operational impacts associated with managing enforcing the program will be significant, and it creates a DMV type system for the watershed. And just to be clear, a registration program, this really is similar to what Mount Tamarancho has, and is different from when e-bikes have a registration sticker classifying the type of e-bike. So this would really be about access to the district's watershed lands through a registration process. So the third tier really is about the watershed sustainable use plan. And this is a longer term concept that we're bringing forward and intend to have future discussions about. And it really acknowledges that it's not one user group that has an impact on the watershed, but all user groups collectively. And we need to think about how we manage these users as a whole and how we preserve and maintain our infrastructure to support that use. So there's a number of different models for similar types of plans. A sustainable use plan is an aspirational concept and would take some deep thinking and a process to figure out with our community and our stakeholders. The general outline might look like a framework for monitoring watershed use generally. It could include an adaptive watershed access plan, so how we review different user groups on a fairly frequent basis. It could include an analysis of our infrastructure and some of our restorative operations to support the natural resources that we have and the users that come to enjoy those. And then it would evaluate community partnerships and engagement, and then watershed staff, resources, and capacity to carry out some of the concepts within the plan. So at this point, this is really just a conceptual component of the three-tiered approach, but we'll be continuing to bring it forward for further refinement and discussion. But we do think, based on the e-bike CAC process and discussions we've been having with the community, having these three-tiered elements makes sense because it allows us to address some things in the near term that supports all watershed use. It allows us to evaluate and continue to consider the actual question about e-bike access, and then it looks to the future about how we might want to engage in the planning process to support watershed use generally. So the next step in regards to public is we want to start to outreach to a number of stakeholders and present this three-tiered approach and take additional comment and then begin to refine that approach further before we bring it back to the board. We're going to be targeting land management agencies to have a specific discussion about their future access options and approaches. Looking at local nonprofits and community groups for further comment on this approach, and then also connecting with private industry to discuss some of these options. So in terms of next steps for the three-tiered approach, the watershed user support framework, we can begin working on our outreach and our signage and our partnerships. That's something that we're currently working on and will continue to expand. We'll continue to evaluate enforcement options and bring forward further options for the board to consider making changes to those. And then together, these elements really will work to foster that tolerance, understanding, and respect between user groups. That support framework is really meant to assist in whichever option the board chooses regarding e-bike access generally. So in regard to the second tier, we'll continue developing the options and we'll take the input that we received from tonight's discussion in the community outreach plan that we put together and further refine this three-tiered approach. And then in regards to the Watershed Sustainable Use Plan, as I mentioned, we'll continue to do research on different recreation plans that other agencies have, but with the thinking that the water district is very unique in terms of being primarily a water district that provides water to the community, but also provides recreation that's unique here in California. And we'll keep an eye on that as we do this research. And we'll bring back a future outline for what this could be developed into for further discussion. And then we'll be outreaching after tonight's meeting to the number of stakeholder groups to start to obtain, set up meetings to actually present this three-tiered approach and actually have discussions and take additional feedback from them. And we'll refine this approach based on that feedback. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to the board for any discussion and questions that you might have on this three-tiered approach assessment generally.
Jump in quickly. Sean, that was a great presentation. Can you remind us where things stand with the, the Citizens Advisory Committee that's been meeting for the last, I want to say, over a year, right? Or getting close to a year?
Yeah, so we've wrapped the Community Advisory Committee up. We've developed a summary report. That's all available online on the district's website, every one of the meetings and the meeting materials, as well as the final report. And that's been concluded. And then we're basically building off of the input that we've received in that summary report to develop this kind of three-tiered approach moving forward.
So when you say you're going to be reaching out to stakeholders, I assume those are going to include, maybe not in a formal way, but they're going to include the folks who served on that committee. I think my impression is that they were all very committed and very engaged. So it would just be useful to hear how you're going to be building on that process for this next round of public input that you're seeking.
Yeah, I think many of those people sit on some of the stakeholder groups that we've identified in our assessment that we'd be targeting and outreaching to. We could also think about doing a presentation just to that group for them to have further input on this three-tiered approach that's come out of that process.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting we necessarily need to reconvene them. It's just when you're talking about stakeholders, they certainly are. They certainly have a stake in the holding. So.
Okay, any other board questions or comments?
I have some comments.
Okay,
Questions.
Armando?
Thank you, Sean. That was really good. I'm just going to go down a short list and mention a few things. I think when you talked about education and outreach, that was really good, and I appreciate you bringing up OneTam as one of the partners there. And having managed volunteer programs, those are really hard to oversee. And having a partner like OneTam that can actually manage and train volunteers is really a cheap or an inexpensive. It's a valuable and inexpensive service that actually is a force multiplier for the district. And it's a significant one, I think, or represents a significant opportunity. Thank you very much about the section where you talked about messaging. I really appreciated the work that you did on that. It was great to see the word respect in large letters on there that basically said, everybody's got to, it looked like it said, in essence, everybody's got to respect everybody on these lands, which was great. A question, and that is, do you follow or have you looked at the International Mountain Biking Association trail guide on how to design trails that are used by bikes? I'm sure you have, I'm just asking it.
Yeah, we've referenced that before. And I think it would be something we could, really reference in more detail in a watershed sustainable use plan long-term.
Yeah, because there's been a lot of work that's been done there. And as we all know, the fire roads and the trails on the mountain were carved by bulldozers and others who were not thinking about these future uses. And so there are plans and strategies that will reduce impact on trail systems based on how you build them. And also I wanted to mention, when you mentioned, Sean, that we are a water district, not a park, you guys know that Mount Tam is a biodiversity hotspot, so, and also the waters that flow into the watershed are not just watershed lands, coming up watershed lands. There's water coming off of state park lands and others. And I just want to point out that there is a new deputy director in the California Natural Resources Agency, and it's a deputy director for biodiversity and habitat. And there's going to be an additional focus on how we are maintaining lands like this. So I would encourage that, understanding that it's a watershed, we really need to be emphasizing, I think, that what we're interested in is a healthy watershed, because it implies we're not interested in this other stuff. We're just interested in the water production. And I think that there's an important messaging opportunity there. Thank you for the sections that you went through. And you did I just want to make sure I understood you. You did mention that you're cooperating with the other land managers on the mountain in terms of talking how these plans could mesh together. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think what for our next approach is really to outreach to those land managers and set up a meeting to have a focused discussion around this. We've generally been having discussions throughout the entire process with them, but I think now we're at a point where we need to convene them and lead that conversation.
I think with all the attorneys in the room, it would seem like it would be a tough issue to cite a cyclist who can then show in the court that it's confusing as hell which land you're on as you're riding around on Mount Tam or even walking on Mount Tam. And so I think that as much as we can align and support each other in terms of agencies, it's going to be better for the public and it's better for enforcement. It's going to let, and I know that that's where you're headed, is to reduce confusion and improve understanding. And I appreciate that very much. And then here's a tough question. What's the data that we have on all the different users and the impacts of all these different users?
We've not done a focused study on impacts of users. So I think that's the long-term strategy of a watershed sustainable use plan really would encompass that kind of evaluation of the patterns of different use and the impacts of all users.
And, and I'll be a little facetious here in saying that, engineers would not put together, a utility plan without understanding exactly what the numbers are And this will lead to my last comment. And I think that's going to be really important for the district and the other land managers to get together and really come up with some baseline information that we can really talk about in terms of understanding what the changes in use are. We don't know what that is. And one of my concerns is an underlying premise in this, to me, really sounds anecdotal. You know, not everybody on the screen here goes to the watershed regularly. A few folks here do. And I have a tough time trying to conceptualize what the whole district looks like, what the whole watershed looks like at any given moment. And so I think it's going to be really important for us to figure out a way to understand what's actually happening on the whole watershed. And so this will bring me to my next point. And that is that when you mentioned the costs of a permitted program, and again, I'm going to be a little facetious. I thought that the costs relative to a dedicated ranger and a ranger vehicle for e-bikes was a red herring, frankly, because that's a huge cost. That's $410,000 for those two things. But how can you say that that's what that's going to cost because of e-bikes when we don't have the statistics of what all the other users are and the other impacts? And so I think we have to be really careful about assigning cost to something that we cannot defend, you know, or support, really. And then, so when you take out $410,000 from that number, you know, suddenly it becomes $46,000 to manage a permit program on the mountain. And I would say that the level of use on the mountain beyond e-bikes already demands that we increase our staffing up there. You know, so I think we just need to be careful, because, you know, there's a lot of people looking at this, and I really want to see us do the right thing. And it's going to take, and I really appreciate the level of work that you've done, Sean. So I'm not being critical. You know, I understand the constraints that you're operating under in terms of this is where we are now. But in moving ahead, I'll stop there. But thank you. That was a really good report. So I'm not being, yeah, right. Anyway, thanks so much.
Okay, any other board comments or questions? Larry?
If I may,
Yep, please.
just to follow up on Armando's comment about costs, and perhaps our attorney can weigh in at some point, but my understanding under Prop 218 is permitting fees and costs have to be directly related to the cost of the permitting or fee itself. So I do agree with Armando conceptually that even though we may need that extra enforcement up there at this point because of the volume of visitors, I don't know if it's going to pass legal muster to try to tie those costs to the permitting. I think we may need to go to some kind of permit process in the future for accountability purposes. But, you know, I don't think we need to go there right now or to move too fast on that. I've had a permit for Tamarancho. It is a much smaller facility than we're dealing with. The permit is very informal. You send them a check, they give you a little tag to put on your bike, and you're permitted. So it's a very simple, inexpensive way to go. The e-bike technology presents a lot of challenges for us. It's very difficult to tell an e-bike from a regular bike, let alone class 1, class 2, class 3. So, you know, we, at some point, if we're going to make e-bike access official, we may need to go to some kind of a permitting system, if only to enforce class 1 and class 2. The other elephant in the room is Americans with Disabilities Act. E-bikes may be other powered mobility devices. During the CAC proceedings, there was a lot of compelling testimony from residents about the beneficial health benefits of e-bikes. And it wasn't only just orthopedic or age oriented. One of the more compelling stories I heard was from the mother of a young child who was somewhere on the spectrum of autism, and the e-bike allowed this youth to get out and get exercise. I mean, it was really quite moving to hear it. It was very unexpected. So I think there's a lot of subtleties that we really need to consider here. I've always had honestly, sort of a little bit of resentment because e-bikes for a regular biker, you know, the e-bike, they don't earn their elevation. You know, they're not working like a regular biker is. But, you know, as I've gone through it and gotten into dialogue with folks, you know, I must say I've kind of softened on that. I was out Sunday up on Eldridge. I probably saw 10 e-bikes. So I would say, you know, probably of 3 hours up there, a third of the bikes may have been e-bikes. It is a much more complicated issue than you may think of it at first appearance. One other thing, I saw one of the emails in tonight's packet at page 24 from Ryan Murphy, which I thought presented a pretty good idea about maybe separating user groups. And it's a very simple proposal. It's at page 24 of the packet that Charisse sent us, and it's from Ryan Murphy. And what Ryan suggested is that you designate certain trails odd and certain trails even, so that the bikes would use the odd trails on odd days and the even trails on even days, but everybody would have access all the time. It's just, I thought it was sort of a very ingenious way of rationing out trail use and separating folks out a little bit. So it's just something I wanted to bring to the board's attention. The other thing, like I said, is I think the ADA issue is a very significant and profound issue. And do we have an ADA policy out there?
Our current approach is to work through this issue, and on the heels, we would come up with an ADA policy for the board. That said, in the intervening time, we are complying with the federal statute. If someone indicates, we have a process where we do allow e-bikes for ADA use. And as you noted, there's bikes up there that aren't necessarily e-bikes ADA at this point in time as we work through this issue.
So what happens if a ranger stops somebody on an e-bike and the person says, I have a disability, or I'm allowed to do this? What is the procedure?
Right. So in compliance with the law, we allow them to continue on their path. As this process evolves and the board decides on certain restrictions, we plan to dovetail a probably more detailed and written policy on how to handle that to support the work of the rangers in line with the thinking of the board.
Okay, thank you for the information. And just final comment, I think the phase 1 program that you've outlined is really a good start. I think creating that culture of respect is so important on a lot of levels. Respect between user groups, respect between all people that come to that space. And I think we should be really directly giving folks, whether it is a sign, whether it's at a kiosk, whether it's a little handout of the rules of the road like you get at Tamarancho. I think these are very sort of low-tech, inexpensive things that we can be doing that are going to start to create this culture that we really need to encourage. So thank you. I think it's a very, it's a very tough subject, much tougher than it appears. And I appreciate your work and everything you've put together.
Okay, any other? Yes, Cynthia.
Thanks. So I wanted to circle back to something Armando said. I think it's worth. What's going on, guys? I don't think that was me.
That wasn't me.
But it was very exciting. So thanks for sharing what it was. I wanted.
The dance break.
Okay. Are we ready to go?
Better talk fast.
Okay. I wanted to circle back to something Armando said, because I think it's important that we not swing past it too fast. So as I said earlier, Sean, I do think that your approach, the 3 tiers, are very thoughtful. I think they're a great framework for moving forward. I think the status of the mountain as a biodiversity, a recognized, the importance of it as a biodiversity hotspot is enormously important. And I think it's important that we elevate that in this conversation. So access is important. All of those other things are important, but the watershed itself is also important. And, there are, it's a big mountain. There's a lot of opportunities on it. And I do think that our special responsibility to that biodiversity, to that ecosystem, is something that I'd like to see it a little bit more elevated. I read through all of the comments in the packet, and if there's anything that has caused me some pause, some concern in this, is that I have not seen, to the level I think we really need to resolve this problem, an embrace of that in the people who are engaged in this. I feel like the parties are still very much talking directly past each other. Some are talking exclusively about access, and there's not a lot of, if any, understanding about our role as a watershed, as a water district, the role of the watershed, its importance as a biodiversity hotspot. And that's concerning, because I think to move forward, to get to whichever answer we're going to get to, we're going to all as stakeholders need to engage. We can't continue to have people simply talking past each other and making the points they want to make while not addressing the legitimacy of everybody else's concerns. So, and that's the one that I think gets short shrift, really. So I want to make sure that that is brought in. And I think you're reflecting that somewhat in the sustainability, the sustainability use plan, but I'm not sure that getting to that keeping it in tier 3 is necessarily going to address our responsibilities as stewards of the of this watershed in the way that I think we really need to be responsible.
Okay, Armando?
Just one comment on that point before we move on. I will just note that in the enforcement section, the idea of enhancing trail closures is really focused around that element of, we have illegal use and it is backers, and we have a program set up to restore some of these areas, and that's the intent to expand that was part of that second tier.
I get that. It's just that that's in enforcement. So there's a whole lot of people that are going to see enforcement and say no. You know what I mean? So what I'm getting at is that we need to be talking about, I think, in a more positive way, right? So enforcement is fine, but we need to be talking in a more positive way.
Forces of evil.
Metal.
Yeah, you're a DJ tonight.
Pretty heavy metal, whoever.
Yeah.
I'd like to just make one.
Yeah, go ahead, Armando.
The
Anyway.
combination
Gotta be an e-biker.
of the comments that Larry Bragman and go ahead, Cynthia.
Oh, sorry, just to finish that point before.
All right.
I see that, Sean. I'm just saying, I think what I'm talking about is something a little different, which is we need to find a way of, if we're going to talk to our stakeholders, we need to bring our stakeholders into that. We need to, for the stakeholders to engage constructively, we need to find some ways of moving them off of, this is what I care about, and I'm going to denigrate the things I don't care about, because we're not going to get there. I was just very struck by the lack of engagement in the comments that I saw tonight. The lack of any, really almost any, I shouldn't say, I don't want to say it too extremely, but you know, there was very, very little acknowledgement about the legitimate concerns about watershed health. And I think that's a big part of, it needs to be a big part of the education that we bring to bear here.
Yeah, thanks. The combination of comments from Cynthia and Larry Bragman actually created a visual for me, which was a t-shirt that says something like respect the mountain and each other. You know, it's sort of, that's really, that's a winnowed version of what we're talking about. And I actually think something, even a statement like that has some emotion to it, which is with all of this, we, as you're saying, Cynthia, I think we need to trigger the positive emotions and engagement. So thank you guys. Those are good comments.
Yeah.
A lot of good comments. Thanks.
Okay, any other board comments? I know we have public comments, so where'd Charisse go here?
Jack,
There you go.
President Gibson.
Yes. We have public comment, I'm sure. Yeah, yeah.
So just a reminder to members of the public who are joining us via Zoom, you may comment by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. If you're using an iPad, I believe it may be located on the top right. If you are joining by phone and you'd like to comment, you can press *9 and we will call on you as appropriate. So we're gonna go ahead and start the public comment. Sorry, before I do that, just a quick reminder to members of the public that public comment is limited to 1 minute. So having said that, we're going to go ahead and allow Bert Barsh to begin. Bert?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, so what I feel like right now is that it's like might makes right out there on the watershed. Whoever can go fastest, it owns the trail. And you know what that means. So you're walking along and you're trying to have a nice reflective time. Some guy comes up behind you, like on the bridge, where it says clearly well, it used to say clearly, but those signs are no longer up. But it used to say clearly that pedestrians and horses have whatever. But the bikes don't do that. They just come at you 3 at a time. Maybe you're just having a little moment where you want to be alone, but you are forced to interact with these guys, and many of them are really aggressive. Now, it's even worse when they come up behind you on e-bikes because they're really fast. And some of these guys are not really all together in their minds, clearly. There are a lot of people up there on those e-bikes that probably shouldn't be on a bike at all. I wouldn't even have them be on a non-motorized bike. For instance, my friend is now in intensive care because he will never recover. 1 minute is not fair. After all this discussion, you give us 1 minute. Let me just say, it feels very disrespectful. Thank you.
The next comment we have is Robert Middlestat. Robert?
Yes, thank you. I just want to say very briefly, I applaud Ben and Sean for their hard work and their responsiveness. And in light of Ben's clarification that the staff is not making a recommendation at this point, I'll defer my substantive comments until later. I want to just say I remain hopeful that people of goodwill can work together and come up with an inclusive solution that doesn't ban bikes or doesn't ban e-bikes. I will say that I agree that we first need to identify the problem and then come up with the solution that it fixes that problem. And we need to get data. And I think one start would be a survey, perhaps by volunteers, so we have a baseline on what the use is on the mountain right now. And finally, given the times that we're living through, the divisiveness that we see all around us, I think it's incumbent on all of us to lower the volume and to find an inclusive solution. And I will do my part to do that. Thank you.
And next we have Rich Peterson. Rich Peterson.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to address you. And thanks to staff and the board for giving this matter such careful consideration. I just want to voice my support for the idea of more outreach and education to create the respectful environment that we all want, and to very strongly give my voice against, greater enforcement or anything that would restrict the use of this great asset that we all enjoy in our backyard, and that we should be including as many people in that as possible. So with that, I'll yield it to the next person. Thank you.
Next we have Judy Schreibman. Judy?
Hi, this is Judy Schreibman. You've all received a letter, board, from the Marin Group of the Sierra Club regarding our opposition to motorized bikes or e-bikes on the watershed. And that letter lays out our environmental concerns with links to the science that supports our comments. So I'm not going to repeat those here. I do want to echo the board members who talked about the biodiversity hotspots being elevated in this conversation. I think that's key. I think that's where the Sierra Club is coming from as well, supporting the wildlife and the plants that are on this mountain and nowhere else. I'm also going to say I object to any changes, as does the group, in the current e-bike policy until the COVID crisis is over. At this time, your own staff, as well as other marine open space staffers and rangers, are really reluctant to patrol the space because of interactions with the public. So any rules or goals or ideas about enforcement at this time are sheer fantasy. And the enforcement before pre-COVID wasn't all that good either. So again, the general manager's report mentions that there were visitor impacts were up, and 2 of the medical aid calls involve patients with critical head injuries that occurred during bicycle accidents. So this is, I fail to see how bringing more bikes into the watershed will be good at this time. I will send the rest of my comments by email. Thank you.
Next we have Larry Minikis. Larry Minikis?
Thank you. Cynthia, I'm entering my 4th hour. Thank you so much. I needed something to laugh about. That was wonderful. And Armando and Cynthia, thank you so much for your comments on biodiversity. Even before you're going to say that, my comment was going to be, please give biodiversity and habitat a seat at the table. And that's what I felt. Sean, it was a wonderful presentation. Excellent. I just felt that was the piece that's missing. And if I may suggest, and I want to suggest it last time, but I ran out of time, and I'm not going to run out of time this time, is that they're using trail counters on Hun Camp Road. And I walked by it, and it can tell the difference between a bike, a hiker, or an equestrian. And you might want to speak to Marin County Parks about this and install these, and it would be an excellent way to track usage. And with that, I'm past 1 minute. Thank you so much, folks, for an excellent presentation tonight.
Next we have Janet Fitzgerald. Janet?
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. Thank you. So I come into this discussion pretty late, so I'm sorry I'm not up on every detail. So pardon me if this question is ignorant, but have you already defined or laid out the difference between the pedal assist and the throttle bikes, the e-bikes? Has that already been discussed? Because, well, maybe not. Well, I was going to ask how many of you had ever been on an e-bike. I just got one 3 years ago when I moved here to Marin, and it's a pedal assist. I have one of those stickers that I was told would allow me on all the trails. I thought, great. And I have to tell you, I have a speedometer. I don't go any faster than any regular biker. I'm way over 40, and I have orthopedic issues and cholesterol and all of these things that being on an e-bike has allowed me to help take care of my health and be with my Drake High School mountain biker, my daughter, Mimi, which has been a thrill for me. It allows me to spend time with her. I help out with the team when I can too. But
Janet, I'm sorry to interrupt. Your minute's up.
Okay, but it's because I have it's a pedal assist. It's very benign, but I would like to ask if any board members have ever been on one so that you can see it does no harm. Happy to talk with any of you after, but I'd really like to know, if you've differentiated between.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. That's okay. Thank you.
Next we have B. Rost. B. Rost.
Thank you, and I want to thank you on a very succinct presentation this evening. Regarding the different proposals about conditional use of e-bikes, I just want to underscore any bicycle on the Water District land is already under conditional use. They are highly regulated by being limited to fire roads which are designed for motor vehicles, true motor vehicles. And it seems that there's perhaps some reason that only e-bikes want to be under conditional use, not other users. And perhaps there's some underlying assumption that there is in fact something nefarious about bikes. Attending most of the CAC meetings, there's been no evidence submitted, no credible evidence that demonstrates any environmental impact from e-bikes different from other bikes. And it seems to me that what there is people don't like them. And no doubt there are some people that misbehave. If there are people who are not acting properly and don't have the wherewithal to empathetically share the trails, that's where the target should be, not a class of vehicles. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Barbara Salzman. Barbara? I'm sorry, let's try this again, Barbara. Barbara, I'm sending you a request asking you to unmute. I think you should be able to speak now.
Well, I can't see how to unmute.
We can hear you now.
You're good.
Okay. I just wanted to support what Cynthia said. That was my immediate impression, that there needs to be more attention paid to the resources of the mountain, the wildlife and the vegetation. It isn't just a respect for the mountain. I think that doesn't really convey the value of the resources that are on it. So there needs to be a more complex message to match the complexity of the resources. And anyway, we'll be continuing Marin Audubon to look at this as we go along. You go along. Thanks.
Thank you. And let's see here. Next we have Alex. Alex 122503.
Sorry about that, guys. I forgot to rename myself. I couldn't do it, but I'll just say I want to be very brief. I'm an e-bike rider. This is the third or fourth MMWD public hearing that I've attended. First one online, but I've been to some of the ones in there. I just want to say I appreciate the thoughtfulness that all of you are bringing to the conversation and the process. It seems like it's evolving. and I play by the rules. I feel like I ride safer on my e-bike, probably because I'm pushing I'll be 59 in August. So, you know, but I ride safe. I play by the rules. I think if we all play by the rules, it'll be fine. I love the sign that has the horses first, then the hikers, then the bikers. And thank you all. I hope we can all share the mountain, including us e-bike riders. Thank you very much for listening to my comment.
Thank you. Before I go over to the next comment, I would just like to remind members of the public that they can email their comments into board comments at marinwater.com, and it will be posted online and provided to the board of directors.
Just to clarify, that's marinwater.org.
My apologies. Next, we have Philip Pillsbury.
Hello, everyone. I've been a longtime conservationist. I was head of the Yosemite Conservancy for many years. I've been a member of the Sierra Club. I am an e-biker, and I'm 71. I have ridden up the road. I've ridden up Eldridge, maybe even with Larry Bragman. I'm not exactly sure. I am a cautious person. The folks that I ride with are cautious. And I can tell you that we respect the watershed. We ride on a hard road, a fire road. I respect that there are people that may be concerned about bikes being ridden too quickly. There is a process for that. But the process is not to ban bikes. The process is not to ban e-bikes. When I go to these presentations, I see over and over seniors that have been on conventional bikes and now need e-bikes to get up the mountain. I think that has to be respected as part of the community that uses this mountain. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Laura Sheraton.
Hi, can you hear me? Thank you. I wanted to thank Cynthia and Armando for bringing up the biodiversity issues and for the others who brought them forth. I did feel that that was missing from the staff report, so thank you for that. A colleague of mine from the Sierra Club and I am on the Watershed Alliance of Marin, did a comprehensive survey of the fire road going from the Throckmorton Ridge Fire Station up to West Point Inn, and then up from Pantall to the same place, and then up to Ridgecrest. And what I want to say is that there's an enormous amount of degradation that's occurring on the fire road. And we counted approximately 75 locations that had serious damage caused by mountain bikers and e-bikers, taking out eyebrows higher and higher, as well as jumps and other things. The fire road is much wider than it has ever been. Bicyclists who...
Laura, if I can please ask you to conclude.
Okay, I just want to say I will be presenting that information to you, and I have photographs. Thank you.
Next, we have David Jacobson. David Jacobson.
Thank you. Can you hear me this evening?
We can, thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you. Also, thank you very much for the presentation tonight. I am a 60-plus-year-old resident of Marin County my entire life. Recently got an e-bike because I was severely injured and could no longer ride. Having come to these meetings, I did my own informal survey that I'd like to share with you. I've surveyed 17 riders of e-bikes on the mountain over the last few months during the COVID, and most of them report to me, all of them actually report to me, that they're over the age of 60, that they're aware of the rules and regulations to be courteous, and that they try and extend those courtesies as much as they can to the hikers and other users, and that they all have found that this is beneficial to them in two ways: one, in their health, physical health, and two, in their mental health. So thank you very much, and I hope that you continue to take everyone's feedback, and most importantly, we all have a deep respect for this mountain, all those that live here, and we all got to work together to take care of it. Thank you.
Next, we have Michael Kelly. Michael Kelly.
Okay, I'm here now. Thank you. Thank you very much to all of you for this great input that we've been going through for several months. I should point out, by the way, that I'm a 77-year-old e-bike rider, and I've been able to continue riding bikes. I've been riding for 40 years. I can continue riding, which is very important. I'm not an additional mountain biker on this ride. I want to say first that we have a group, if you're going to be talking to stakeholders, please include the electric mountain bicycling access group as one, because these are people who know a lot about this issue. The second thing I want to say in this short time is that I actually like Cynthia Kohler's remarks about biodiversity. I'm totally in favor of that. I've been a Sierra Club member since 1983, this time, and before that as well. It's very important that we get together, and that's why we go to this mountain, because of the biodiversity. We love that. That's why we do. The best birder I know happens to be a mountain biker. And I also want to say that let's build a community as we decide how to deal with this. I agree. Let's not talk over and at each other. Let's do it by community.
Michael, if you can please conclude.
Okay, that's it. I'll submit my remarks. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Larry Kushner. Larry Kushner.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, I'm going to just try and rush through this. I've been attending your meeting since 2018 in August, which is pretty much when this all started. And I commend you guys for sticking with it, and hopefully we'll get somewhere with this. I qualify under Ben's ADA allowance. I have a letter from my doctor saying that I have a back issue. I'm 73 years old. I ride pretty much in Tahoe, but I do come to town. What I want to point out is there, for instance, Judy Schreibman's letter that was sent to you is wrought with very unfactual stuff. So if you can get to my submission, it has all the factual information that debunks a lot of the things that she's talking about. I also sent you a copy of something that you've gotten before from me, of the rules of the trail and etiquette, which I promote very heavily. I'm actually an advocate now in the Tahoe Basin for e-bike usage. And also there's a letter from another Sierra Club member that is named Travis McGuire that I hope you guys would all look at.
Larry, if you can please conclude. Next, we have Tom Boss. So, Tom, I am unable to give you the mic at this moment. You do have an older version of Zoom, and so it's not allowing me to allow you to speak. However, you can call in. You can call in on 1-669-900-9128, and you can press *9, and we can take your comment that way. Or if you like, you can also submit your comments online, and again, it will be posted onto our website and it will be sent to the board. And now I'm going to go ahead and allow Judy Rogers. Judy?
Thank you. I would like to thank Directors Kohler and Quintero for underscoring the importance of the watershed's health. Marin Municipal Water District lands are a treasure to be preserved, and I thank you for your consideration. Thank you very much.
Next, we have a phone number ending in 0420. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute. Caller?
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Saul Lakin. I am calling in both as a rider who rides on the Water District lands, as well as an employee of an electric bicycle company, Specialized Bicycles. I'm also, maybe it should be noted, I'm a 29-year-old electric mountain biker. And one thing I want to say is, you know, often my age group gets singled out for being some of the ne'er-do-wells on the mountain. And, not participating in processes like these. And I just want to say that we're here, we are participating, and we do participate and intend to participate in the educational programs that both the staff and other members of the public are encouraging us to do. We're supporters of that. And I basically just want to register as a rider, my support for Class 1 access on Marin Water District lands in the same places that bicycles are allowed. And I also want to offer my expertise working for an electric bike company. My job involves engaging in these conversations all around the country. And this process has been a particularly thorough one. I want to applaud everybody who's been involved. It's been wonderful. And I just want to offer my expertise to the board as they could make this decision. Thank you very much.
So at this moment, we no longer have any hands up. So just again, another quick reminder, if anybody, any of the members of the public are on Zoom and participating and would like to make a public comment, you can raise your hand or you can press *9 on your phone. And it looks like we do have some more hands up. So I'm going to go ahead and call on Bill Albright. Bill?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, thank you for the chance to speak. I'll be very brief. I've read the entire plan. I am a member of the e-bike community and a member of the CAC committee, and I strongly support the Tier 1 plan. I strongly reject the Tier 2 plan for a lot of reasons, and I strongly support the Tier 3 plan. I think that as more and more people discover the beauty of Mount Tamalpais, they're going to want to come there. I think that peer pressure is a far more powerful effect on human behavior than rules or ordinances or enforcement. And I think that if you give e-bikers a chance to participate in the process, that they will help very much in making Mount Tamalpais a better and safer place for all of us to spend time on. Thanks so much.
Next we have Kurt Altvater. Kurt?
Hello, my name's Kurt Altvater. I want to thank everyone for bringing up this topic. I'm a mountain biker. I have friends who are e-bikers, and I'm also a member of the One Tam Ambassador Board. I use the mountain regularly, and I'm very much an advocate of sharing the trail and an advocate of stop and say hello. The one point I wanted to make tonight is I'm very much also an advocate of user fees. I think that user fees are important so that we can use those fees to enforce the rules for both bikers, e-bikers, mountain bikers, who are both e-bikers and non-mountain bikers. And at the same time, we could use those funds to perhaps maintain the trails and some of the disruption that people have talked about, erosion and what have you. So that's my only point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kurt. Next we have Michael Fernandez Maloney.
Hello,
Michael.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you for your time, directors, and I would like to offer my support and commendation also for Mr. Horn's, the aspect of Mr. Horn's report in option 3, which proposes, as I understand it, a Tamarancho-like registration and permit system for e-mountain bikes on Mount Tamalpais. I think this is a great idea. I think a Tamarancho-like registration and permit system would, all of the pros that Mr. Horn lists are really great. And I just think it promotes use by individuals who, this includes a lot of the people I ride with on a weekly basis on Mount Tamalpais, due to age, without e-assistance, are not going to get to enjoy that mountain as they get older. It's that simple for me.
Thank you. And Tom Boss has his hand up. Let's go ahead and attempt this one more time. So Tom, again, I'm unable to allow you to speak because you have an older version of Zoom. So I just want to let you know, I did attempt to give you the mic. Unfortunately, it is not allowing me to do so. If you want to call in, again, the number is 669-900-9128, and you can press *9. We do have 2 more hands that were raised. Thomas Jung.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for the presentation tonight. I just wanted to share that I'm an avid hiker, and I've had good experience with e-bikers being courteous and sharing the road. So just wanted to share that perspective. And I always feel like change is difficult. And I remember when the snowboarders came onto the mountain, and it was strongly discouraged from allowing snowboards onto a ski mountain. And of course, we have to change, and we have to let different demographics have enjoyment of the mountain just like hikers do. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you very much.
Have Jim Baldwin. Jim?
Oh, thank you very much. This is Jim Baldwin speaking. I'm a 57-year-old conventional mountain biker, and I've been very fortunate to have been invited into a couple of groups of e-bikers as well as conventional bikers. And the going sort of anecdotal evidence is that you can't really ride an e-bike in this group unless you're at least 70 years old, which allows me the privilege of riding with a number of older guys who have been on the mountain in some cases since the 1970s. And when it comes to recognizing the biodiversity of the mountain, you can find these guys stopping and talking about the natural features of the mountain, the butterflies, the animals, all the different things that we see every time we ride together. And it's wonderful. And I'm just here to say, I think that mountain biking access increases awareness of biodiversity on the mountain. Thank you.
Going to attempt to allow Tom Boss to talk. Tom?
Hey.
I'm sorry. One moment. Hi, Tom. We heard you for a second. Are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I had to switch computers really quickly. First, I just wanted to thank everybody. I think the 3-tier process is a really good path forward. We look forward to participating, Marin County Bicycle Coalition, that is, as a stakeholder, and also working with some of the other stakeholders. There's these plan meetings with individuals, but let's try and bring some of these groups together at some point as well. I just wanted to say I'm 100% for biodiversity on the watershed. I live in Forest Knolls, and you probably don't realize it, but I'm like 1,000 feet away from the watershed. And there is, if you look at the watershed map, you'll see that 2/3 of it are very low impact, from the Rock Springs parking lot near the Mountain Theater all the way out to the Kent Dam. Is a huge swath of land with very little impact. And yeah, so anyway, there's a lot of places where we can enhance the watershed, but also balance it with recreation on Mount Tam proper, where so many people do enjoy different types of activities. So thank you.
Thank you.
So at this point, we no longer have any hands up.
Okay, thank you very much, Sharice. You did an outstanding job.
So sorry, President Gibson.
Yep.
We have another hand up from Larry Kushner.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and allow Larry. Larry, are you there? Mr. Kushner?
Speak.
We had you for a second, and you cut out again. So
Keeps coming back. It keeps on muting me.
we can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, great. I just wondered if anybody in the group wants to ask me any questions. I'm very heavily involved with the Forest Service in Tahoe. I've been following what's been going on Mount Tam for quite a while, and I have a lot of input that I could give you if you have any questions. Anybody have any questions? Okay, I just want to bring one thing. It was mentioned about OpMed, other powered mobility devices. And it would behoove you to read that. It's part of the ADA rules. And it actually says anybody that has any type of disability can ride an e-bike. It doesn't say specifically e-bike, but the definition does fit e-bikes. So just another thought that you guys can look at. Thank you. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you.
And that concludes our public comments.
Okay. Now we have, I think we're going to do open time. Okay. Are there anybody have any comments for open time? Anything not on the agenda?
So President Gibson, we did have one comment that was emailed in advance that was not on the agenda that was sent to the board members, and it will be posted online on our website.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess with that, we can conclude the meeting, and thank you all very much for your participation. Thanks.
President Gibson.
Yes.
Right, we were going to do it in the memory.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought that Cynthia had already done that. I'm sorry. All right. We decided we're going to conclude the meeting tonight in memory of Huey Johnson, and thank you very much for the comment that Cynthia had made for the record, I think, earlier on tonight. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, good. We'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you all very much.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.